When Leslie married me, she already had a son from her first marriage. A quiet, razor-sharp boy named Zach. He was autistic, barely spoke, didn't meet your eye, but he could draw like something out of myth. Like the pencil was a scalpel, and the page was whatever dream needed dissecting. At first, I didn't know how to reach him. I was just the man who appeared one day beside his mother. He didn't flinch when I moved in, didn't ask questions, just kept drawing. Kept one hand on his sketchpad and the other hovering like it was still holding the world he wanted to live in. He didn't speak until he was 7. Even then, words were like glass in his mouth. Rare, painful. But he didn't need words. Not really. He communicated in details. In the texture of fur on a fox he saw once through the window. In the specific angle of light hitting a church steeple we passed on the way to school. I remember thinking, this boy sees everything. Not just sees maps, catalogs, records it all down with a precision that made me feel like I was always 2 steps behind. Like he was reading from a manual I didn't have access to. I never tried to be his father. That word felt radioactive. It had weight, history, blood. I didn't carry any of that. I was just a man trying to help. I paid the mortgage, fixed what broke, showed up to school functions, even though he never liked crowds. I learned how to pack his lunches the exact same way every time. Sandwiches cut diagonally. Grapes in the green container. Napkin on top. He never said thank you. But if I got it wrong, he'd quietly take the lunch apart and rebuild it at the table. It became our rhythm. He didn't talk, I didn't push. But I was there. Every morning. Every night. Just there. 3 years into the marriage, I came home to silence. Not the normal kind. A vacuum. Leslie's car was gone. The bedroom half empty. Closet doors yawning open like mouths missing teeth. Her wedding ring sat in the sink. No note. No warning. Nothing. Zach was 9. I stayed. Because someone had to. Because that morning, before I realized she was gone, Zach had left a new drawing on the kitchen counter. It was of the 2 of us. Me kneeling by the porch fixing a loose board, and him sitting on the steps, sketchpad in his lap. In the drawing, the sky was orange. The porch lights were on. And for the first time, he'd drawn us with expressions. His mouth, barely perceptible, was curved into something like a smile. I stared at that drawing for hours after I found it. Felt like a message. Like he was saying, I noticed you. I see you. That same night, I made my decision. I canceled my hours at the contracting firm. Took a lesser job. Something local. Home by 5. Health benefits. Flexible hours. I didn't tell anyone why I switched. Just did it. Quietly. Like everything else in this house, you learn to do things without the noise. Zach didn't ask where she went. Not once. Just kept drawing. The first few weeks were mechanical. I didn't sleep. Kept the house running like it was all clockwork. Cooked. Cleaned. I sat through therapy intake forms and learned what I could about sensory processing and meltdowns and the difference between echolalia and scripting. I read every book I could get my hands on about autism. Not to fix him, God, no, but to understand. To meet him where he was. To stop being afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing. I learned that silence could be a kind of language. That when he handed me a drawing, it wasn't just a picture. It was a conversation. A diary entry. A confession. Once, after a hard week, I found a sketch on the table of 2 chairs. One with a figure sitting, head bowed, the other empty. The window behind them was dark. No moon. No stars. It was the most alone I'd ever seen him draw someone. I recognized the figure. It was me. That's when I started saying goodnight out loud. Every night. Even when he didn't respond. Especially when he didn't. I'd pass by his door, knock once and say, "Good night, Zach. I'm right here if you need me." Some nights I heard nothing. Other nights a pencil would stop scratching. Eventually, one night I heard his voice, barely above a whisper. Just one word. Night. I stood frozen outside that door like I'd been hit with a blunt object. It wasn't a breakthrough. Not some miracle moment where everything changed. But it was a start. She didn't come back. Not that month. Not that year. Not once. Zach kept waiting, though. Every time a car slowed near the house, his eyes went to the window. When the mail came, he'd shuffle through it like a detective. Holidays were the worst. I bought him a small tree for his room, put up lights around the house. But he never touched them. Just sat by the front door, staring, like the act of waiting had become its own ritual. The first Christmas without her, he didn't speak the whole week. I stayed, because someone had to. By the time Zach turned 12, he was painting. Not just sketching. Painting in oil, mostly expensive, difficult, unforgiving oil. I sold my old truck just to cover the cost of his brushes and canvases. Drove a rusted Ford for 2 years so he could have the supplies he needed. I didn't tell him that. He never asked. His paintings started small. Cityscapes, skylines, reflections of buildings in rain puddles. But they evolved, became larger, stranger. People began to appear. Always faceless, always half-formed. I think it was his way of saying, I don't know who these people are anymore. Or maybe I never did. He had a show by 14, a gallery in Austin. I remember walking in, heart pounding, watching strangers stare at his work with the kind of awe people usually reserve for church ceilings. The owner came up to me, shook my hand and said, "You're the father?" I nodded. Didn't correct him. I never did. Not anymore. That night, on the drive home, Zach said something I wasn't expecting. "She's not coming back," he said, staring out the window. I gripped the steering wheel. The silence after that sentence felt like someone had stopped the car with their bare hands. "I know," I said finally. He didn't say anything else. But I saw the way his fingers curled around the sketchpad in his lap like it was the only part of the world that hadn't betrayed him. We didn't talk about her after that. But I kept the lights on. I made sure he had what he needed. Got a part-time housekeeper to come once a week when the gallery work picked up. Bought him a better computer. Set up a studio in the garage with heat lamps and blackout curtains and the kind of silence he preferred. He still didn't talk much. But when he did, it mattered. When he said thanks, it wasn't a filler. It was a bridge. I stayed. Through everything. Because someone had to. It was a Tuesday morning when everything changed. Nothing about it was supposed to be special. Zach had just turned 19. He spent most of his days in the converted garage, painting in that meditative way of his, headphones on, door open, brushes twitching between fingers that never stayed still. I was making coffee when the call came through. New York number. I almost didn't answer. The man on the line sounded breathless, like he was trying to speak through disbelief. He introduced himself as a gallery partner, someone who had discovered Zach's work through a collector who stumbled across one of his paintings online. Said there'd been an auction. Private buyer. I thought it was a prank. Then he said the number. 3.6 million. I sat down. At first I thought he'd added a zero by mistake. Maybe 2. But he was already rattling off next steps. Shipping arrangements, wire transfers, tax forms, interviews. Said the buyer wanted to remain anonymous but was offering a long-term contract, a possible exhibition deal, a museum interest. I wrote everything down. Mechanically, like I wasn't in the room at all. When I told Zach, he didn't react. Just blinked. Asked if he could go back to painting. I said of course. He went. But that night, he didn't sleep. I found him in the kitchen at 3 a.m. Barefoot, staring into the fridge like he'd never seen it before. His hair was messy. His fingers stained deep blue. I asked if he was okay. He said, "What happens now?" And I didn't have an answer. But I knew what I hoped. Maybe, just maybe, we'd find peace. That this boy, this man, could finally breathe without the weight of always having to prove he was enough. That maybe I could finally stop holding my breath too. I was wrong. She came back 3 weeks later. Leslie. Same sharp eyes. Same smile that never reached them. Only this time she brought a lawyer. They showed up on the front porch without calling. She was dressed like someone playing a part. Heels too high, purse too clean, blazer untouched by wind or time. She looked me up and down like I was a stranger. "I'd like to reconnect with my son," she said. No apology, no hesitation, just that cold phrase. Reconnect. As if the last 10 years had been a dropped call. I didn't say anything. Just open the door, let them step inside. Zach was in the garage painting. I didn't call for him. The lawyer did most of the talking. Custodial concerns, parental rights, financial oversight. He used the word reunification like it was a spell that could undo everything. I sat across from them at the dining table I had refinished with my own hands 5 summers ago. Coffee in front of me, no offer made to them. When Zach finally walked in, he looked between us, then at her. Then he whispered, flatly, "I'll handle it." That was all. And I knew in that moment, truly knew, that whatever bond had once existed between them had withered, snapped somewhere deep. There was no recognition in his voice, no longing, just a quiet, chilling neutrality, like he was staring at a painting that had faded beyond repair. We went to court 6 weeks later. Her lawyer tried to paint a picture of absence turned necessity. Mental health struggles, emotional instability, a mother doing her best. They leaned on everything except reality. Zach didn't speak much, just nodded when asked simple questions, clarified his preferences, said, in his slow, deliberate voice, "I don't want contact." But the moment that ended everything came when the judge, a tired man with heavy eyes, asked Leslie a single question. "What's your son's favorite color?" She faltered, blinked, tried to recover. "I'm not sure that's relevant." "It is," he said. "Answer the question." She opened her mouth, closed it again, glanced at her lawyer, looked back to the judge. "I don't know," she said. The silence that followed was unbearable. I didn't smile, didn't speak, just let the truth hang there like smoke. Zach reached into his bag and pulled out a photo, handed it to the judge. It was old, maybe 7 years. I'd forgotten he even had it. Him, asleep on my chest, paint on both our hands. A canvas half-finished in the background. My head tipped against his mouth slightly open. Safe. He didn't explain the photo, just let it speak for itself. The judge looked at me, then at Leslie. "All petitions are denied." Her lawyer tried to argue, threatened appeal. The judge didn't budge. Outside the courtroom, she approached me, alone, said, "It wasn't that simple." I said nothing. She waited for more, some word of comfort, some permission to rewrite history, but I just looked past her, to where Zach was sitting on the bench, sipping orange juice from a bottle, eyes distant, mouth calm. He didn't look up, didn't flinch, didn't move. I turned back to her and said, "You knew what he liked when you left. You just stopped caring." Her face twisted with shame or anger or something in between, and then she walked away. I didn't watch her go. I was already done. The next day I made a call, canceled the trust we'd set up for Zach years earlier, the one I'd built in case she ever came sniffing around. Moved everything into a secured private account, locked under his name, with me as sole guardian until he turned 25. I wasn't trying to punish her. I was protecting what mattered. That weekend he asked if we could move. "I don't like the light here anymore," he said. "It's dirty." I said, "Where to?" He said, "Somewhere quiet." We moved to Santa Fe 2 months later. Found a small adobe house with thick walls and wide windows. The kind of place where you can breathe without explanation. I built him a studio out back. He paints every day. We got a dog. She's small, white, curls up at his feet when he works. He named her Lilith. I never asked why. He still doesn't talk much, but he smiles more. Not big, loud grins, just those small flickers, the kind you only notice if you're paying close attention. Like when I bring him coffee in the morning, or when I laugh at something in the newspaper and he sketches it quietly behind my back. He doesn't call me dad. Never has. But when he's overwhelmed, when the world gets too loud or someone interrupts his rhythm, he finds me, curls into my side, and says just one word, "Stay." And I do, always, because that's what I've always done, what I'll always do. She came back for the money, but lost her son for good. The lawyer called a week after the hearing. Not mine, hers. He left a voicemail, said there had been miscommunication. that perhaps we could revisit the financial implications in a less adversarial setting. I deleted it without listening to the rest. Then came the letters. Certified mail. Legalese wrapped in politeness. Phrases like parental investment rights and civil entitlement. I read them once, then put them in a drawer I never opened again. The paper felt too clean for the filth it tried to carry. Zach never asked about it. Never mentioned her again. He had moved on the moment the judge said no. That was how he worked. Precise cuts, no lingering wounds. But I knew better. Just because he didn't bleed in front of her didn't mean he hadn't been sliced open inside. He spent more time in the studio after that. Hours. Whole nights. Some mornings I'd find him asleep in a pile of brushes, paint caked under his nails. His canvases changed, grew colder, harsher, less about architecture, more about isolation. Figures hunched under collapsing ceilings. Streets with no doors. Shadows without sources. People called it a shift in style. I knew better. I watched the cost of her return settle into his bones, silent and unacknowledged. Meanwhile, the outside world wanted more. Galleries doubled their offers. Collectors whispered his name like it was a brand of sacred currency. Someone from the Guggenheim called. Said they wanted to open a conversation. And still, he said nothing. He just painted. I handled the calls, the contracts, the numbers. I hired someone to manage inquiries so I could spend more time at home. Zach didn't like strangers, especially not the kind that smiled with teeth. I kept them at a distance. Made sure he never had to explain himself to people who only saw dollar signs in his silence. Then, 6 months after the hearing, she came back again. Not in person. In headlines. A blog post. Then an interview. Then a feature. She called herself the lost mother of a genius. Told stories about postpartum trauma, about regret, about rebuilding a bond with her son. Said she'd been encouraged to step away for his safety, and had never stopped thinking about him. She wept on camera. Told the interviewer she had been erased from his narrative. I read it all with my jaw clenched, not because she lied, but because she'd made herself a victim of her own abandonment, and no one questioned it. People started messaging Zach's art pages. Some kind, some not, asking why he wouldn't forgive her, calling him cold. A few accused me of manipulating him, of gatekeeping a boy's right to know his mother. Zach read none of it. He had me filter everything. But one day he saw a clip, just 30 seconds, her voice, crying. He didn't say a word, just stood there, then walked out to the backyard and vomited in the grass. I sat beside him for an hour. Neither of us spoke. Eventually, he leaned his head against my shoulder. Not like a child. More like someone too tired to hold up the mask any longer. Later that night, he came to my room. Stood in the doorway. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. Was it wrong to want her gone? I set the book down. Looked at him. No, I said. He nodded once. Then, after a long pause, do you think she knows she hurt me? I considered lying, but I said the truth. I think she doesn't care if she did. Not really. She only cares that you're worth something now. He didn't flinch, just left the room. But that week, 3 of his paintings came back from the gallery, returns. He didn't explain, but I knew. He didn't want to sell them anymore. Didn't want them hanging in the homes of people who believed tears could replace time. He started painting on raw wood after that. Refused to use canvas. Said it felt too polished. Began carving into the grain with knives, burning the outlines with lighters. His work grew darker, more primal, and still people loved it. Even more. They said it had evolved. What they didn't understand was that they were watching a boy cauterize his own history. One night, I walked into his studio to bring him tea. Found him staring at a new piece. A massive panel of black and crimson. No shapes, no lines, just a weight, a pressure, a heat that made you step back. He didn't look at me, just said, I named it what she left behind. I set the tea down and left. Some things don't need questions. Some truths don't survive being spoken aloud. Eventually, the letters stopped. The lawyers quieted. The blogs moved on. But Leslie didn't. I know because she emailed me directly months later. No subject line. Just 2 sentences. You don't deserve him. I was his mother before you ever were. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. Then I printed the email. Walked it out to the fire pit. Burned it without a word. Zach was in the studio. He didn't see. That night, he asked me what I thought about building a greenhouse in the yard. Said he wanted to try growing things. Things that didn't require him to be anything more than consistent. Water, sunlight, soil. That's all they need, he said. They don't expect apologies. They just grow. So we built one. He planted tomatoes, herbs, a few citrus trees in pots. He named them, not with human names, with sounds, shapes. He'd call one CRK and another Dune. He said it helped him track their growth. I didn't ask questions. We just watered. That was the season things started to settle. Not heal, not fully. Some wounds calcify, harden into bone. But we learned to live around them. Zach painted less, gardened more. He took up welding. Made sculptures out of discarded steel and fence wire. Said it felt better to build something no one could hang on a wall. I kept managing the money. Kept answering calls. Kept the wolves outside the door. But inside, it was quiet. It was ours. And in the quiet, I remembered who I was before all this began. Not a stepfather. Not a legal guardian. Just a man who stayed. Who showed up. Who sat beside a boy on cold kitchen tiles while the rest of the world turned away. That's all I ever wanted. Not credit. Not applause. Just to matter to the person who mattered to me. She came for the money, but left with nothing. No son. No memory worth holding. No photo framed on his shelf. Not even a name. And I stayed. Through the ache. Through the fire. Through the silence. Because someone had to. People ask why I didn't go for blood. Why I didn't drag her through court a second time. Sue her for damages, slander, emotional distress. Why I didn't fight to make her pay for what she tried to take. Could've. I had the means. I had the evidence. But I didn't. Because revenge is just a mirror that makes you stare at the person you hate until you become them. And I'd already spent enough years being erased by people who only looked when it suited them. This was never about revenge. It was about protection. We stayed in Santa Fe. The desert suited Zach. Something about the dryness, the stillness, the heat that didn't beg for attention. We lived simply, cooked more. He painted less. The studio became a space, not a prison. Sometimes I'd hear him laughing, soft and short, like he didn't quite trust the sound. Sometimes I'd wake up and find a new piece on the porch. Always unsigned, always unannounced. I never asked if they were meant for me. I just brought them inside and hung them where they'd catch morning light. He didn't need to say thank you anymore. We were past that. Past needing to make every act into something explainable. But when he did speak, it meant something. One night, he found me in the kitchen washing the dishes. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, the dog at his feet. Lilith had grown gray around the eyes. Like both of us, she'd weathered storms without barking. I don't remember her voice, he said. I dried my hands, turned to him. He wasn't looking at me, just staring at the floor, brow furrowed like he'd misplaced something important. She had a voice, he said again. Right? I nodded. Yes. Do you? Yes. He didn't ask me to describe it. He just nodded and walked away. I stood in that kitchen for a long time, listening to the clock tick, listening to the breath of the house we'd built. A house filled with things unsaid, things forgiven, and a silence that had become our own language. That's what people don't understand. Forgiveness isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just staying. A year after the trial, we got a letter. Not from her. From a publisher. Said they wanted to do a biography, Zach's life, his work, his journey. Said it would inspire a generation. That they'd frame it around overcoming odds. I declined for him. Didn't even tell him it came. Because there's a sickness in the way people romanticize pain when it's not theirs. They want the drama, the tragedy, the twist at the end that makes them feel like life is poetry. But Zach's life wasn't a narrative. It wasn't a lesson. It was a wound stitched shut by calloused hands and quiet days. It was made sacred not by spectacle but by survival. And that survival had been earned the hard way. By waking up, showing up, staying present. Not by telling a pretty story to strangers who never lifted a single burden. I remember a night years later, when we sat on the porch during a thunderstorm. It rarely rained like that in Santa Fe. But that night it came down in sheets, thick and cold. The garden soaked. The lights flickered. We didn't speak. Then he asked me something I wasn't expecting. If I stop painting, am I still worth something? I looked at him. He was 23 by then. Taller than me, quieter than ever, eyes like glass, always seeing what others missed. I said, "You were worth something before you ever touched a brush." He shook his head, frustrated. "That's not what people think." "No," I said, "it's not, but they don't get a vote." He sat back, rain speckling his jeans. "She left when I was 9, he said. "I don't even remember what I did that week." "You didn't do anything." "I must have. Something to make her leave." I closed my eyes, counted to 5, opened them. "Zach," I said, "some people leave not because of who you are, but because of what they lack, and nothing you do can fill that hole." He didn't respond, but his jaw unclenched, and for him that was something. I think the hardest part of all of it wasn't the abandonment. It wasn't even the courtroom or the threats or the lies. It was realizing that I had spent years apologizing for loving someone else's child like he was my own. Years afraid of crossing lines that were already burned. Years accepting silence as the only thank you I'd ever receive, and convincing myself it was enough. And in some ways it was, because love isn't measured in gratitude. It's measured in constancy, in who stays when the money disappears, when the doors slam, when the light goes out. She had her chance. She had blood. She had history. But I had presence. I had the dinners made when no one asked. The lights turned off after he fell asleep in the studio. The quiet good night, whispered through a closed door for years, even when no answer came. That's what builds a father. Not biology. Not even legality. Just this, I stayed. Zach lives in Taos now. His work still sells, but he doesn't push it. He donates most of the profits to nonprofits that support neurodivergent kids. He teaches twice a week at a local center. No one there knows who he is. No one asks. And he likes it that way. I visit once a month. Sometimes we talk. Sometimes we don't. Last time I went, he was in the garden trimming back the basil. Lilith had passed the year before. He buried her beneath the olive tree behind the house. Planted wildflowers. Said it felt right. He looked up when he saw me. Nodded. Smiled. I sat on the porch while he worked. When he was done, he handed me a glass of cold water and said, "Thanks for not leaving." And I thought about every moment. Every slammed door. Every word left unspoken. Every year spent holding a family together that had been broken before I ever arrived. And I said, "Thanks for letting me stay." So now I ask you, was I wrong? Was I cruel to draw the line when the person who abandoned him came crawling back for the scraps of his success? Was I wrong to protect what mattered, even when it meant standing between a child and the woman who gave him life? Was I wrong to stay when staying meant sacrificing everything, and still being told I didn't belong? Or was that what fatherhood truly is? Not blood, not permission, not praise, just staying. Even when the door never opens. Even when your name is never spoken. Even when love is a one-way street paved with silence. Tell me, if it had been you, would you have stayed?